Alexander, welcome virtually to the bookshop. Thank you for taking your evening to come chat and hang out.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no worries. So we're here to, well, first of all, talk about your book that you have at the bookshop, and also just a bit more about what you do, and and also weirdly how we actually know each other. I just had no idea because I'm stupid, and just how much of a small world it is with our crossovers. So well, in my head, we're meeting for the first time now, but apparently we briefly crossed over in, was it 2022?
All right.
No Jobs in the Arts Manual for Failure event in Leicester. Which, if you wanted to talk about, why you were there.
Yeah. It's such a weird like coincidence. I guess I've been following your work, since then, but it didn't really kind of click. So yeah, it's really nice that we kind of figured that out finally. Yeah, I was there because I was commissioned to write, I guess, a piece of writing, documenting the day which No Jobs in the Arts, Ryan and Charlie fantastically set up to address artist failure, ways we fail, and why, and the fact it's a really useful tool to pick apart our creative practices, and also bring people together into a space that allows that movement for not getting things right. So yeah, just there and chatting to artists that were also commissioned on the project. Yeah, I think it ended up being a zine, if I remember right. Um, and that's kind of why I was there in that role.
Nice. And so it's your writing in the actual. Yeah, it ended up being like a virtual zine, didn't it? So actually,
Yeah,
that's our work kind of crossed over there as well, because all the photos. That's why I was there, was to document it visually, which was one of the kind of. Well, I feel like anytime you work with No Jobs in the Arts, it's been like some of the more interesting commissions I've had. But like them coming to me being like, so we need you to photograph this event, but it's about failure, so it needs to like go wrong somehow, which is one of the weirdest briefs I ever had. It's like, okay, so you're paying me to like do it wrong, or like you want it to go wrong, or like it was quite a funny one, but it was a really fun day though, from like being there and like interesting creatives talking, communicating, and a lot of paper aeroplanes I remember kind of vividly.
that is a memory I hadn't even remembered. Yeah, paper airplanes. Yeah, we threw them at once, didn't we? Or like, so was there like a competition which one went furthest? So
Yeah.
that's the back of the mind memory.
And I think the only reason it like stuck in my head because it was like one of those pictures that I took after I think everyone threw them, and they all kind of landed near this bin. And I don't think anyone was necessarily aiming for the bin, but none of them went in, so it kind of just looked like everyone missed. And I was like, okay, that's the one. I think that's the one that ended up on the front cover. But yeah, that was really cool. So that was like our first little crossover.
Yeah.
And then so since 2022, what have you been up to in the 2 3 years it's been?
Yeah, quite, I guess quite a fair bit. What happened after 2020? Well, I was in Hull at that point, but I'd moved from Nottingham to Hull in like the back end of 2021, and yeah, we'll probably talk about Hull a bit, won't we? But it's a small place, so that I guess establishing as an artist in a small city, um, or like finding a creative practice, and that journey took quite a few years, I suppose. Since then, I worked in like kind of the municipal gallery in the city, as like artists tend to do, is just find a job that allows you to explore creativity outside of work. Um, and I was doing the whole like I guess it's sort of that dream of being a security guard at a museum, but it'd be really generous to myself to call myself a security guard, just working in front of house, and but pursuing um, my practice alongside that. So alongside another artist in the city, Lauren Wilson, and as part of a collective called Creel Project. Um, we put together an exhibition in her garden. It was kind of the first thing that I explored when I came to Hull was how do you uh, navigate a city where it's really difficult to get people to go to things? Well, try and do the weirdest things and take art out of like galleries because they just sort of don't exist, or they exist from very sort of small artist-led spaces. And where do you put that work on? So yeah, with Lauren and our friend Ellie, as part of the Creel Project, we put in a work by Natasha Montferred, who's an Iranian-British artist, mainly making sculpture and stained glass. And it was a big, a sort of a lipstick rocket, about 8 feet tall, and just dug a hole in Lauren's garden and planted it there with a few small sculptures in the greenhouse, and just invited people around. And that was, I guess, the first thing that I really explored when I came to Hull was just, what make you do what you've got. That was that would have been in end of 2022.
And it's interesting in spaces like that because I think your approach is the correct approach of just like do the weirdest thing possible, because there is that kind of, well, there's almost like a stigma around like gallery shows. There's almost like that no one wants to go to a gallery anymore. They want to do anything else, and also in smaller places where it is hard to put all of that effort in just to have like 4 people turn up when you want it to be like an event. And I've been talking to a few people recently about like similar things and how they're tackling it. Another mutual connection of ours, Luke Harvey, he runs a space here in Northampton called Studio Malarkey, and one of the artists he runs with the space with has made like a miniature model of the studio, and they've kind of done this inverse thing of taking that model out to different spaces. I think it's mainly targeted at sort of young people to kind of be like, no, the space is there for you to walk into. See, it's not terrifying, because there is sort of an element of like uncertainty about walking into a space. But I think as well, a garden is just like another, like just putting it out there into it almost kind of merges it with like, almost in a way with like street art and things like that in almost like a half public space, at least it's outdoors, which is another interesting solution to the issue.
Yeah, totally. That like way of describing it as like a half public space is really lovely. Because I guess that's what it was. It was like down there. You entered either through the front door and went through the house, or you kind of went down this little 10-foot little alleyway to the back. You came through the back gate. So it was totally public, but you had to know the person to get in. So maybe that doesn't make it public. I don't know. But it was a way to. It was inspired by an artist called Julia McKinley. Julia's based in Leeds, and I forget the name of Julia's project. For over a year, she hosted I think it was 4 or 5 sculptors or artists in the practice of sculpture on the front of her driveway. A really fantastic sort of series of interventions. So we were like, what can we do in our little neck of the woods and make something half public? Felt like the right kind of thing to do.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then, so how does that bring us to today, where you do stuff with, is it Hull Street Gallery?
Humber Street Gallery, yeah. That's my it's my day job, I suppose. You've got something that pays the bills, but it's a big part of my practice as well, or has increasingly become. So in 2023, I started there. I'm a program assistant. I work across our exhibitions. We have a lovely industrial building in an area like where the marina is, which is Humber Street, which is historically a fruit market. There's been a massive place for trade. Hull's a maritime city, and it built its industry on fishing and the kind of import and export of goods. And on Humber Street, it was fruit, the fruit market mainly. So yeah, we're based in an old industrial building, um, and we run exhibitions across sort of two spaces, which is um, mainly like national artists. Yeah, we commission organisation in a way, and we work a lot with local and regional artists too. And we also have an engagement side, so I work on our engagement, which I think increasingly is where I'm steering my practice towards working with people. Kind of however that looks. If it's in really small ways of gathering people to something, or working with them to create something. So yeah, started there in 2023. I've seen quite a few different practices come through the gallery. In the first exhibition that we put on when I was there was Bruce Asbestos. Bruce is from Nottingham and has been practicing in like fashion and big inflatables and paintings and yeah, his exhibition was called Bootleg Shreg, and it was just like this kind of wacky, I guess like expanded sculpture realm, where there's big inflatables of like newt's eyes, these big green eyes, and sort of build your own sculptures, but also using like bootlegs and like fakes and knockoffs of Shrek. So those paintings, and that like opened my eyes to, I guess, different ways to make and different ways to engage people in art without it feeling alienating in a really accessible way.
That's cool. And you keep mentioning your practice as well. How do you... It's always a difficult question to ask anyone creative, like how do you sort of define your practice, or what is your kind of goal? Because from the book I made the bold assumption that you're a photographer, like most people we know, but obviously you're obviously a writer as well, and that seems quite important to what you do.
Yeah. I guess the way that I describe it, my practice is as a creative practitioner. Um, I didn't come from a visual art or an artist background. My degree was humanities subject. I studied American studies for 4 years, and then did my MA in art history. So it's really like an academic sort of way into working in a creative way. Um, I call myself a creative practitioner purely for the reason that I guess I'm not a photographer, although I use photography. So it just feels like really disingenuous to say, I'm a photographer just because I use images. It's a big part of kind of how I approach what I do creatively is just to say, I practice things in a creative way, and that can span working visually with archives and archive photography. So a lot of what's in the book that you mentioned after I came home is archive photographs that I kind of pour through online and just search internet archives database and just look through all the stuff that people have gathered online over the years and other sources of archives, and all the way through to running kind of reading groups and workshops with people through zines or creative archive kind of practice. So I guess that's how I think of my practice. It's not artist, but works in artistic ways.
And in some ways that almost makes you more interesting than a lot of artists who are like quite narrowly defined as like I'm a painter or a photographer or something, because I guess it must almost be quite freeing to have that level of like you can kind of go wherever it takes you. You can kind of like figure out your place in wherever, or maybe it's not freeing, maybe it's a nightmare and I'm being idealistic, but
no, it's a pretty kind way to explain it. But I think you're right in the sense that it does allow for a freedom. It allows for if I'm centered people in what I do and sort of say that I work with people, well, really that can be anything. And I want to say like I'm very early in that process. So words like co-creation and working co-creatively are still like new to me as well. and I haven't really figured out if that's what I would describe it as. But there's so many practitioners that I look to in a socially engaged practice. I'm like, yeah, that is what I want to get to. That's how I want to work with people, by kind of not being, or being the person that brings them together, but not being the voice that determines what gets created.
Yeah,
And that's
almost
why I
like
find it really fascinating that people are experts in their own fields that just haven't been realised yet.
yeah, almost like a facilitator of these things happening, which is yeah, an interesting way to approach a practice. And I I do different stuff to you, but that's always something we try and incorporate into like the studio. Like we put on exhibitions for other people and kind of go like, what do you want to do? And then furthering that with the bookshop, and then the podcast as well is another way to kind of talk to people in places where you wouldn't necessarily have an excuse to, and then using what those people bring up to be like, okay, that generates a new path to go down that you can then relay back to your more personal things as well. And it kind of, it does a nice thing of taking the, you know, we're English people, so we don't like being the ones being looked at, so it kind of like pushes the spotlight off of you, and it lets you kind of remove yourself a small bit from it, but still being able to get excited about it. And now I am going to revert the spotlight back to you, because I would like to talk a little bit more about the book that we've mentioned a few times that's in the bookshop at the moment, which obviously you mentioned uses a lot of archival photography. I believe some you shot as well, and it was created during a residency. So I'd be curious to know how that kind of came to be, and the themes kind of came together, and what your process and your approach to making a book was.
So yeah, you're right. It came out of a residency with Hull Artist Research Initiative, kind of known as Harry, which is run by again a fantastic artist, practitioner of everything, Sarah Pennington, and was formerly run with Thomas Robinson as well. So it's that a residency was offered to 25 artists, not just in Hull. You know, they kind of came from a little further afield, from Sheffield, Leeds, London, I think a couple as well. So basically, I guess in some ways respond to this building that Harry's located in. It's an old factory building. You see a running theme in Hull that things happen in old factory buildings. That Harry, I guess, operates out of in terms of exhibitions and hosting residencies. But it was a totally new space as well. They're a meanwhile space in some ways. So it was about responding to the building, I guess telling some kind of story of the residency and what was happening in your exploration across the time you were there. The kind of guide was to be there for 25 hours because it was 25 Francis Street. But it was so free, like I stayed a little bit longer than that. I think I spread my time over about 5 or 6 weeks and really tried to spend some time with this building that used to be car parts factory. Didn't make them, it sort of just sold them. So you had these huge catalogues from the 60s of car parts, which I guess doesn't really come across in the book in any way. But that was the freedom of the residency, that it could be this kind of personal response. So I took in some books, as you always do with residency. You just kind of bring things with you and see whether they'll tell you anything about what time you're about to spend in a place. And one of the books was John Davola's Escapes. I love John Davola's work. Kind of formative in my thinking of like place and how photography is like is used as a medium kind of repetitively, or in Escapes, there's that amazing shot of the dogs running after the car as he's driving, and I read in the book that he just kind of hung the camera out the window and just snapped as he was driving. So there's this like really amazing process that I find this work. So I took that in and tried to, I guess, understand the materials of the building. So took a lot of photographs of each of the rooms. Um, there's like amazing paint that's peeling off. That's just old, like obviously lead based paint that's so vibrant, blues and oranges, kind of coupled with these remnants of work as well. So there's big, long wooden desks that would have been service desks, and like an office room that's quite clearly where the manager used to sit. Um, there's the only wallpapered room in the building, and still has like a broken lampshade. Um, so yeah, trying to get to grips with all of this and find, I guess, a story in the building that hadn't been told or that wasn't even really real. And that's where the idea of the story, or the like flash story kind of comes out. So after I came home, it's me imagining or an imaginary funeral kind of proceeding through the building. Um, and yeah, what's that journey that it takes up the stairs, and what is the, you know, the building have to say about this funeral happening within it. And it's, I guess it's told from my perspective or an imaginary me. Um, and yeah, it's a way of also, I suppose, working through grief in some ways. My mum passed away a few years ago, and I think that being in a building that is this like empty shell, or it's really like kind of, it's not oppressive in any way, but it's definitely impressive in the sense that I was on my own in there. So you're sort of working through all of these ideas that are kind of coming to you, and that's, I think that's the process that I went through of just thinking a lot, sitting down at a table and walking around, and yeah, just trying to touch as much of the building and imagine as much of it as possible. But you mentioned there's archive photographs in there as well, and as I say, part of my practice is digging through archives, and you know, funeral archives came up a lot in it because it made sense for the story. So finding loads of really old, weird funeral pictures in online archives, online databases.
And did you go through the archives during the residency, or was that after? Like, how much was done during that that recommended 25 hours that you were meant to be in there? Was it the project start to finish, or did you finish stuff afterwards?
Oh, totally took it out of the building. Like, it followed me home in a weird way, because I think I'd kind of dug into something that interested me outside of the residency. Like it could exist longer than that. So yeah, I did most of the kind of prep writing. So like some poetry that kind of never saw the light of day, and probably shouldn't really. It's just not really fully formed. But it was such an important part of thinking through ideas. So yeah, I did some of the writing whilst I was there. Some of the archive, well, most of the looking for archive photos happened outside of the residency. I kind of used the time more to sit with the building and take photographs of the building. So yeah, it definitely came home.
Nice. And like, how do you feel about residencies as a whole? Obviously, you've done that. I assume you've done other ones, and it's something that I know a lot of people who hang around our space would be interested in knowing about, because from our neck of the woods, there isn't as much of that going on, but people kind of have this because there's no one to ask about how it works, and be curious to know a little bit more about kind of why they're good, why they're useful, and or even what they are for people who maybe are wondering what the hell we're on about.
Yeah, I actually haven't. I haven't done any residencies before that. But I guess in ways I've done extended work in places. So in Harry's previous building, I'd run workshops there. I guess as a kind of long-term engagement model, mainly making zines. So yeah, as an experience, you're right. It is an interesting thing to think about, that like I can just go and spend time in a place and no one's going to bother me, or people don't mind me just making work. Um, it's a fantastic way to explore things that you probably never thought would come up. I guess the only thing I kind of like attribute it to, or like kind of make it similar to, is when you go to the library. If anyone still goes to the library, like I love going to the library because it's a space to just work. It's kind of okay to have a home office or home studio, but with the same for artists who have studio practice, that by going to the studio, you have this separate space that you can just really think in, and separate home life or separate work life from. So yeah, it offers freedom. I really enjoyed the residency last year at Harry because it I guess it made you feel part of something a little bit bigger as well. There was 24 other artists, all in incredible ways exploring this one building. So you just sort of thought you were adding to a richer tapestry, and yeah, contributing to maybe something more than just your practice, but equally having that space to totally engross yourself.
Nice. And then as well, you mentioned earlier, before we started recording anyway, at least, a project involving some typewriters that was briefly mentioned, and I'm curious.
Yeah, right. So type loops. Yeah, it was with another artist in Hull, the Aimless Archive, and it's an artist called Thomas Robinson, and his kind of practicing project is this, the Aimless Archive, very archival based approach to art, and so I guess it started maybe 2 years before that. So the actual performance happened last September, the Dying Lights of Summer. But like maybe a year and a half previously, 2 years previously, I'd written Tom a note, which I think something like did this framework for what a performance could be, and it was in the way I remember it, it was sort of saying, let's set up two typewriters and just write to each other, hand it to him to think about it, and then he messaged me and was like, yeah, I've got this way that we can do it, and where we can do it, and that was last year. So type loops was a sort of durational conversation performance. We set up a typewriter on the street level of Harry, a Hull Arts Research Institute, on the street, and then one on the top of the building, which is about a 2-story building, a 3-story building, I think, and threw over this single loop of fax paper, which in theory and kind of in our minds we just thought would sort of just hang lovely and straight and would never pose any problems with the wind, catching it like a sail, which it inevitably did, and battling with showers, rain, light rain, and the building sort of catching the paper, and ripping it, and so consistently having to repair this piece of paper. So over 2 days, sunrise to sunset, we just typed. We just used typewriters to write to each other, or think through, in a sense, maybe a residency, this kind of 2-day residency, to think through our ideas, and out of that came, nuggets of projects and just ways of thinking about what we do. And the kind of outcome was this long piece of paper with loads and loads of writing on it. I guess it reminded me of Jack Kerouac's On the Road, of writing this single stream of consciousness. And so over those 2 days, we were open to the public. We had people coming by, cars slowing down, just like looking out the window, like kind of looks of consternation, confusion on their face. People stopping by and asking what was going on as well. So that was really, really fantastic. That you know people were experiencing this weird performance, maybe on the way to work or just as they're passing by, and I guess hopefully kind of enriching that cultural experience, and just seeing something happening in the city that you would never see before. Um, and we also kind of invited people in to, when the rain got a little bit heavier, we went inside and rode from between staircases and tried to use the building as a really big part of it. And just, yeah, spending time with people, just talk to them as we're doing this laborious essay.
I can, the visual of this long stream of paper like hanging off a building is like not at all what I expected when you told me earlier you did a project with typewriters.
Yeah, it was quite a spectacle. We invited an artist called Emily Fratson, who's based in Hull, to spend like a morning with us documenting it. So Emily took some really, really beautiful photographs of the loop, of the type loop, in position and kind of sailing in the wind, but also some really like kind of intimate photographs of me and Tom, kind of reading over. So yeah, it was certainly something, I hope anyway, to behold.
That sounds really cool. And I'm noticing a reoccurring theme as we're talking about the idea of archives, and that seems almost central to a lot of what you do. How did that come about? So I know you studied humanities and things like that. I'm sure that had some influence on that aspect of your practice.
I think so. Yeah, I think spending like 5 years of university, like research heavy stuff, but never really thinking about it at all in that way of just, it's monotonous. It's just, okay, well, this is the model of study and produce an essay, and that's kind of that. And then dissertation and done. It's definitely had some influence in just that enjoyment of finding things, of stumbling across a new piece of writing, stumbling across a photograph that you kind of never thought existed. One of the and that was, I guess, a way that allowed what I do now to flourish, because I'll always start something with an archive search, and it's usually, and it's kind of, I guess, because it's difficult to access in-person ones without going to where an archive's kept, or maybe you can rethink what an archive is, and that's a bigger conversation. We'll start with a search on the internet database, where everything that's ever on the internet is meant to have been kept, which leads me just down some rabbit holes. Out of the residency at Harry, when I was looking at like funeral rites photography, I kind of just carried on searching and oddly came across like NASA's public archive of photographs, which are all open use, sort of just documentation of space missions and and weird things like that. So it's a starting point, I think, in a lot of ways to try and understand either a place or an idea. So I really enjoy looking through like city and town archives. The Leeds one, Leodis, is this really rich tapestry of photography that's been taken of Leeds across the years. I've been recently looking through Hackney's archive for a workshop there in a few days. So yeah, they're starting points, I think, and I think that's where either ideas kind of die or flourish and maintain themselves.
Yeah, that's a unique way to go. I mean, I'm sure there's other people doing it, but from like other people I've spoke to, I've only known a few to be involved with like archives and using that as a jumping off point. So it's yeah, unique to hear, especially when you're looking at ones that are stored physically and stuff that may not be, say, on the web or stored elsewhere. It's like a unique thing to find in itself. I was going to ask about another thing, which was virtual ecologies.
Yeah, virtual ecologies. So I'll tell you a little bit about it.
Yeah.
It's a project that's run. I guess there's about 6 of us working on it, but it's led by an artist called Matt Fratson, who's an interdisciplinary artist, but with a real focus on this scientific, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying it, but this scientific like thing called shifting baseline syndrome, which just goes over my head in the science kind of way. But from what I understand of it, it's like how you remember history, but we use that as our baseline to understand how we should do things now. I guess like if you grew up on a farm, or you have lived on a farm, well, maybe a past ancestor would remember it as this rich green landscape, with birds tweeting every day and so much wildlife. And now you remember it very differently, and it probably looks very different to that now. And how we base what we do in the future, how we move towards different agricultural processes or ecological processes based on those memories, and understanding how that's then transposed, thousands and hundreds of thousands of years in the past. So yeah, virtual ecologies is based on this shift in baseline syndrome sort of theory. It's a lot of workshops with people across East Yorkshire, working mainly with communities, rural communities, to explore some of those ideas, and explore some of their memories of the places they live in. I'm working with Bernardo's, as part of my kind of part of the project, with their group called Buzz Club. It's a club that, or I guess an initiative that Bernardo's run, to support people between the ages of 18 to 25, who have disabilities, who are neurodivergent, and otherwise might not be able to kind of access social support networks. So yeah, which have been really incredible to work with this really small group of talented and just really enthusiastic young people. I say young, but I'm only 28, so they're not much younger than me. But yeah, that's the kind of category, isn't it? Young people. So alongside that, there's other artists on the project who are working with people with Alzheimer's and dementia, with schools. We've done a lot of work with schools, to kind of, I guess, bring art into places that it hasn't been before, or doesn't get a chance to be engaged with.
Which, slightly calling back to earlier in the conversation, you talked about like when you did the exhibition in the garden. It seems like another way of it, like bringing it to them essentially. Which again, Yorkshire is another sort of smallish kind of place. It's another way of tackling that. How do you make art and creative stuff in places where it may not be sort of established or stereotypical?
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of bridging that gap of just access as well. I mean, like Northampton, it's very similar in that way, right? Like it's more, so it must be quite challenging, I'd imagine, to work there.
It's weird. It's like there's like a central town that's not very rural at all, but like there's this a large rural surrounding area, and it's just a very strange place. A lot of art, but a lot of sort of separated out little communities that have a habit of not talking to each other or not telling anyone that they exist. So it's sort of been an interesting navigation of like, okay, how do we start pulling the people we know together, and then how do we get them talking to this other group that we know some people in, and just sort of trying to connect up the dots and going, okay, but you can do this thing you've talked about for the last 5 years, like go get on with it, sort of thing, and just sort of I think it's like, from me and Alex's perspective, it always boils down to like, we grew up here and we went through, you know, primary and secondary school where everyone's attitude was like, as soon as I can, I'm running as far away from here as possible. And I don't know, for both of us, for whatever reason, either we're just like geared to be just contrary to what everyone else is sensibly doing, but we were like, fuck that, we're gonna just keep it here, and we're just like, why not do it here? You know what I mean? Why, almost why give that sort of thing into somewhere like, because we're right near London, so most people just are like, okay, it's an hour train, cool, I'll go do it over there, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with that, but we were like, well, what does that give for all the people that were like us, who are now at school dealing with the same thing of being bored every weekend, or not having something to do, or not knowing where to find stuff that's actually like, you know, productive or enriching, and instead of like, you know, finding themselves in like less ideal situations because out of, as kids do, sort of thing. So yeah, and I guess our studio and the shop is a bit of a response to that in a slightly different way.
But you're absolutely right though, like it's why not be somewhere, I guess, is the really thing, isn't it? Like, why not? Why can't it happen here? There's an artist, I don't remember, Dinosaur Kilby, based, I think he's in Birmingham, between Birmingham and Wolverhampton, and it's kind of part of an exhibition down in Peckham that I was like kind of fortunate enough to run a small reading group with. He created this, or him and a couple of his kind of a couple of artists he worked with, for friends, created this banner that said, "Nobody's watching, do something," or something to that effect. And it absolutely is. It's like, well, you know, if you don't do something, no one's going to take notice, and people are probably watching anyway, so just have a go. And I think that's really kind of, what we're saying is like, why not? Why can't it happen?
Yeah, and I think that whole like nobody's watching thing is when you're in a smaller, there's kind of that feeling that like everyone knows everybody, even though they don't. So there's a lot of people being like, oh, I just can't do that because everyone's going to judge me. As like, people don't think like that in a London, because it's like, realistically, every single person I walk past today, I'm never going to see again because there's so much going on. So it's like, I'll do what I want. And it's that inverse effect as like, one of the, it was first year of uni, because we went to Northampton Uni as well. And there was, I think he did the first half of first year, but he was like a street photographer. He was from London, and he like started the course and was like, I'm gonna go out on the weekend to do some street photography, and he came back on the Monday and he was like, people here are fucking insane, like, you pull up the camera and they're looking at you like they're gonna beat you up. And he was like, I didn't take a single photo while I was here, because it is that like, you can't blend into the background here and disappear. Like, if you're on a street, there's gonna be, it's not completely dead so you can take a picture, and it's not busy enough for you to not be like painfully obvious and have that sort of like everyone turns around and looks at you. There's always going to be like 3 or 4, but just enough to outnumber you and make you feel kind of intimidated. So there's that in it, but that extends to everything, like, you know, with what they're doing and putting stuff out, is that people are kind of keep quiet and have this odd habit of like not shouting about what they're doing.
Yeah, and that can be quite, like, I suppose it might feel like, nobody's gonna turn up. He said it's like no one's gonna turn up to this thing that I'm doing. But on the other hand, you know, in small communities like Northampton, like in Hull, you know, where you're kind of relying on each other in a really intimate way to support each other, to come to each other's things, and show up and you know, big each other up in a really important way. Like London, you do either, so you sort of melt out, you know, into the background. There's that risk of like, it's no one's going to come, but there's so many people there that could come. Where we have to, do that for each other.
Yeah, and I think, and then there's that other thing of like, okay, everyone's coming to support because it's like, you know, that idea of like, if you don't use it disappears, because eventually the bills catch up and people just only have so much tolerance to support these things or just don't have the money in the first place. But also the equal thing is like there's this weird pattern where like it'll get busy and then people try and go like, no, this is our patch now, and then anyone new coming in, it's like, Jesus Christ, these guys are like clearly been friends for 15 years. I'm not meant to be here. So I think the bookshop was kind of a expansion to that, because it was like, how about all these like connections we have from different places around the world and the country, we kind of bring them into the studio so it kind of connects our little community to other things, so they don't get that attitude of just like, oh, it's just a little local thing, it's nothing. Because people who live here, like wherever you're from, you have a habit to be like, yeah, but that's not like the real world, you know what I mean? The real stuff's happening over there, and I just can't access it. As really, it's like, that's not the attitude from that place. Has the same attitude about themselves and not other places. It's like a very strange thing, but trying to put yourself into, you know, like that bigger picture you talked about in the residency. It's like trying to realize you're not this tiny insular thing that doesn't factor in. As weird it is as to say that about something you've done yourself.
Yeah, no, but it's like the way you, I remember your message to me like when you were kind of asked for the book, and you're like, oh, you just try and do this like village thing down here, like village up in Leeds and Manchester. It's like, yeah, absolutely, like, you know, they are bookshops, but they are places where you kind of, at least I do anyway, like, I go to Leeds to go to village, you know, if I'm in Manchester, I'm going to village because I know it's not just a bookshop, it's kind of a place where it's supporting people, supporting artists to show their work, and especially, you know, book-based artists. Yeah, you get a zine up in there, and you kind of, that is a massive success. Whereas like kind of Waterstones, all these like bigger retailers, that just feels like an impossibility, and like it's not made for that. So yeah, it's super important to have these spaces where, on the face of it, you could just say it's a bookshop, but it's more than that. It's a place to kind of be.
Yeah, and it's that balance, isn't it? Because Village supports loads of artists from around the world, and it's like it's that, but they also have stuff from like bigger names in different places. It brings it all together in one place, which is yeah, like you say, at Waterstones, it's like, I'm not even going to bother sending that email. It's ridiculous. They're just going to be like, fuck off. But like there's, well, still when you send an email to them, you're still like, they're going to tell me to fuck off with this one. Like, but it rides that line perfectly, isn't it? It's like they're open to the idea that like anyone can do it, and that's. Ooh. My girlfriend's just walked in.
You knew
She's
it.
hidden away. Yeah. Well, cut that part out. But that's kind of similar to what we want to have here, and it's fighting that battle of like getting more and more stuff from different places, so people don't assume it's just whatever anyone does it locally, they'll put it in, and there's no regard for a baseline quality, but also not being just no, we don't want your small little thing, however like special or amazing it may be. We're only interested in, but it's like that. It's just a weird balance to strike, but it's an important one, especially now.
Yeah, definitely, and especially spaces are disappearing as well. Like in Hull, I mentioned Harry at the start, and it's kind of like a massive part of the ecology here, where artists kind of, you can go there and something's going to be on that's interesting, but also you got that support. You could be doing that interesting thing as well. But really, it's kind of like the only space for visual artists or people kind of consider themselves to be working in art, as an artist that way, which makes them just so vital to sustaining people, to keep them in a city, in a town, instead of, like you say, like, oh, London's only an hour away, I'll just go there, because there's more, there's richness in having less as well.
And it kind of, in a weird way, it's that effect of, yeah, no one's watching, so you can do the weirdest stuff possible, but also it kind of forces you to do more interesting stuff, because kind of in a big city there's also the assumption that like I can just do whatever I want and people are going to come because there's enough people, so I only need to bag 0.05% of London to come, and that's going to be busy. As here, it's like if you don't put in the effort, yeah, it's going to be no one's going to come. Like you have to do something fucking out there, and that leads to some really interesting adaptations. Like, and I've noticed it in not just like art spaces, but other small businesses around town that have to do things like a little bit differently. And then you're like, when you start seeing why they're doing those things, it makes perfect sense, but it's something that then becomes unique and kind of special because they're the only people doing it that way.
The Hull's got this like really amazing history of that sort of thing, of like no one's watching, so it's going to be the weirdest thing. Like time-based arts came out of Hull, or like, it was a massive part of Hull's like scene. I'm not like the historian on it, but like I think it was sort of the 90s and that sort of cusp of the 2000s, where people were just like testing the boundaries of performance art and film and sound and real sonic stuff. And like that in some places that can feel like, you know, this history happened, kind of where are the people? But I think Hull, and probably like a lot of other sort of smaller towns, industrial cities, some of those artists stick around. Like our tech at the gallery, David Priestman, and then I'm just shout his name out. He was in time-based arts, but you've got this kind of timeline where that feels impossible, but this person has stayed around and is like a vital part of making things happen still in a totally different way. And an artist who kind of still performs live called Yol. Yol's a time-based art, performance arts and sound and odd things. Still does things in the city, and it's like, you know, it's all right having these like grand ideas that we should have these, you know, nationally and internationally recognised artists in the city, but if you forget the people who are still here to do those things that did happen, sure, you know, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, you're going to lose out on a lot of opportunity to see some really radical stuff. It feels really special here to be able to still kind of see that stuff happening.
Well, that's wicked. It sounds like an interesting space. No, I've never been, but it sounds, from what you're saying, I'm learning about some kind of interesting names and stuff to go and Google later on. The other thing we haven't touched on our list, Yak, your reading group.
Yeah, Yak. You know, it doesn't stand for anything. It's spelled Y-A-K, but with an exclamation mark. Yak's a reading group that I sort of, I've been doing reading groups. So maybe this is a thing that kind of started when I moved to Hull. With Sarah, who runs Harry, you're going to kind of get the sense that this is a very small scene of people doing things. But we started working together on reading groups in April 2022 to, I guess, in some ways respond to residencies and small exhibitions that were happening in their old space on the high street. And over like, you know, sort of 2 years, we'd run those groups, and I sort of thought, well, it's been like really amazing to keep doing that in Hull and you know, kind of thinking more deeply about what artists are making work for and kind of interrogating that. So I guess it was, you know, very, very interesting to develop it that way. But I was like, well, I kind of want to do this with other spaces and work with other people, not in a sense of I want to work with other people, but, you know, what would it be like to take this to a new town? What would it be like to kind of engage with a new building, with a new space, with a new people? So with Yak, I just kind of thought, okay, I'll give this a go and get in touch with Dinosaur Kilby. Had an open call at that time for I think the exhibition was called Stone Standing Still. I'm probably butchering that. Something like that, at Staffordshire Street down in Peckham last September. And I was like, yeah, well, I'm going to give this guy a shot and see if when I run a reading group there, see if this kind of thing works. Um, and luckily it did. Dinosaur was really super supportive of bringing it onto a program that had like loads of interesting film and performance art and interventions and happenings. And just kind of went from there, really. I've worked with, or currently working with Working Class Creators Database with Chanel and Seren, who run that initiative, run that fantastic way of supporting working class artists and giving those platforms to people who haven't necessarily had it before. So we run those online. They've been really nice to run, like, in a digital space. And I also work with Wes Foster. Wes is a creative practitioner and kind of camera-based artist in Leeds. So we've run those at a space called Hyde Park Book Club, which is in the Hyde Park area of Leeds. Fantastic, really awesome like gig space, and just a nice coffee there as well. If you're in Leeds, do go. Or if you're not in Leeds, get to make the journey. And it's also kind of supported by Hyde Park Art Club, which is Sarah and Benny, who've been really incredibly supportive to bring this reading group project there to engage with their exhibitions program. So I guess the kind of sentiment of it is to engage in these conversations, kind of these dialogues across towns, across cities, and just sort of see what people have to say. And the way they work is, you kind of, I work with whoever I'm working with and just having a text. It's never heavy. You can do these reading groups, like, and they're just like theoretical texts that require so much thinking, and you never get anywhere with them because you're all just overwhelmed by the words on the page. So it's using plays and novels or short bits of writing, diaries, you name it, to engage with some kind of broad theme. And increasingly been introducing, me and Wes have been working on sort of, I guess, say activities, but it sounds really dull when I say that. But just something after the reading to get active and physical with, make something that you kind of have to take down after 2 hours. We did some projections with old overhead projectors and archive images that just kind of projected onto the walls of Hyde Park Book Club, and just seeing what can happen in the space of 2 hours. So it's been really fun. I love reading groups. I think they're a way to beat that model of education that makes kids sit down at a desk for an hour at a time and 8 hours a day, and then still hopefully that love for learning in a place where you kind of never thought that you might walk in and learn something new, but also share something as well. You kind of everyone's an expert in something, or everyone at least has knowledge about something. It's bringing that in and this mutual exchange for learning.
And it's
that's a bit about Yap, I think.
No, that's cool. And then just to round it off, do you have any other burning desires or anything to get off your chest or anything like that you'd like to state to the world?
Well, free Palestine, absolutely. And that's the only thing I kind of want to say at the end. Probably that's shouting to people who are already thinking that same way, but it deserves saying. No, there's nothing really burning on my mind. I think places like like PHOTOMAFIA, bookshop now, the studios, and these are like important places. And I guess yourself and other people around the country who are setting up these spaces and working your socks off to keep them going, because it's not easy. It's what's needed. It's you're not getting supported by our governments and by our councils to really do anything in the arts. Cutting funding every time you kind of look around the corner, and artists are getting their pockets like rinsed. So yeah, it's kind of we all need to pitch in and do these kind of things and support each other.
Yeah, 100%. And thank you for the kind words. And
Yeah.
yeah, you're right. The like art things are being cut by governments and councils, but at the end of the day, I'm from the angle which is like, well, fuck them. Let's just let's just do it and
Yeah,
do it yourself
absolutely.
and not be distracted by that. So yeah, but no, that was a good note to end on. Thank
Thanks,
you
Joe.
for taking your evening and having a chat. It's been fascinating, actually. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a
And
pleasure.
where can people find you? Just
Yeah, on Instagram, Alexander Stubbs with two S's at the end. And that's kind of the main place, really. I've got a website, but it's a Tumblr blog because that's like, yeah, it's free.
nice.
So yeah, no, Instagram's the best place. So just reach out to me.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, man.
Cheers, Joe.
I'll leave you to your evening and have a good week.
Yeah, you too, mate.